Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. It is a Wednesday. Today is the 11th day of March. It has been too long since we've been together with you live on the Virtual Center and at the Virtual Center, and I just want to welcome you to the program and let you know how glad we are to be back with you. I was going to interrupt Bob's introduction there about the continuing conversation to suggest that the conversation continues after too long a hiatus, as it were. We've had some production problems, as you know. Bob Kincaid was in Washington, D.C. for the last week, and we've had some issues since he got back the first part of this week. So today is going to be our long program this week, and then lo and behold, we're going to have a repeat again on Monday because Bob in the production facilities for the Virtual Center has some obligations for next Monday that he needs to fulfill. So we're probably
Dr. Bill.
Yes, Bob.
Let's just go ahead and tell folks why. I mean, coming up on Monday, the 16th. People of good conscience from all over Appalachia will be converging on the state capital, Charleston, and in particular on the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection, kind of Orwellian, for what is being referred to as the People's Foot. The People's Foot. We are putting the People's Foot down and demanding that the DEP no longer issue any more mountaintop removal permits because of the profound and deleterious and, in fact, fatal impacts of mountaintop removal on people who happen to live near it. So that's what we'll be doing, and we may even be delivering a live stream. Okay.
Well, Bob, thank you, and that's the reason our production facilities for the Virtual Center are fixed, and so when the producer moves, the equipment doesn't necessarily always go with them. So therefore, we're planning to probably not have a live program on Monday, but we will be back on Tuesday. I just wanted you to know. And I'm gonna brag because I've lived through this, but on Sunday, this Sunday, my wife has a birthday, and on Tuesday, she and I celebrate our 9th anniversary. So I'm quite excited about that. I told her this morning, it looks like we're going to make 9, but I wouldn't bank on 10, so. But anyway, I'm looking forward to it. I'm so excited to be back here at the Virtual Center today. It's been far too long. There are all sorts of things going. I, for several days, kept accumulating materials that we would ordinarily use for programs that didn't happen. And now I've got, a 2.5-inch thick pile of materials that I probably won't get to because many of the issues have come and gone. They are time sensitive, and I think you can understand that. But be that as it may, there are some issues that it seemed to me flaunt time. They fly in the face of time because they are so significant and so important that they are not time sensitive, and they deserve attention. And hopefully we can deal with some of those. And there's a couple of those that I would particularly like to address today. But first, I would like to encourage you to communicate directly with us and become an active participant in our program. We do have a phone number that is reserved principally for the purpose of getting you on the air. Our number is area code 304-663-4676. That's 304-663-HORN, HORN. 4676. If you'd like to communicate directly with me in a number of the issues that I deal with here, are leads that I've gotten from listeners who send me emails, and most specifically links to particular issues and particular topics. And I couldn't function without them, and I'm so appreciative of them. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's WAObrien, OBRIEN 906, all one word, no punctuation, at gmail.com. As you know, we're broadcasting from Appalachia, from southern West Virginia. And as you know from previous programs here at the Virtual Center, an issue that we have revisited over and over again in the last several months, and indeed over the last year and a half, I guess, are the Common Core standards. And you'll remember when they were first developed, they were rapidly adopted by a number of states. In fact, I believe 46 states had initially adopted the Common Core. But as you also know, the Common Core standards have become a political lightning rod, if you will, for opposition to school change. The allegations have revolved principally, and I think this is still true. The opposition issues rarely get into the standards themselves. Rather, they focus on the periphery. They focus on who adopted them, who approved them, the struggle for control over education between the states and the federal government, the issue of local and community control over schools, all of it basically coming down to the quality of education of our children. Here in West Virginia, our new Republican legislature, in its wisdom, passed initial legislation in the House to rescind the Common Core standards. And that caused quite a stir, if you will, in Charleston, especially at the State Board of Education, because if the state arbitrarily pulls out of the Common Core standards, it's going to cost the state around $128 million. Not only in money spent to develop and design the Common Core standards for West Virginia schools, but also in federal money that would not be available, that is tied to support of the Common Core. So the legislature rethought the issue and decided to postpone decision on the Common Core standards for 1 year so that they could spend the year studying the Common Core standards. Obviously, what this says, to me at least, is that the opposition to the Common Core standards has in no way disappeared here in West Virginia. What has appeared is a realization and a consideration of the money that the state would lose if we just out and out abandoned the Common Core standards. So government does what it usually does. It creates a committee, and it puts them under study. And of course, basically, some of us who've been in higher education for years would facetiously make the comment that there's one committee that performs all of these duties, and it never finishes. It just studies issues that nobody ever wants to see the light of day ever again. And now here in West Virginia, the Common Core standards have been included in that. I was fortunate this past Sunday to have a piece that I penned, that I wrote to our local newspaper, the Charleston Gazette, on the Common Core and what I saw as the reasons for opposition to the Common Core. And it just so happened that the very same day, in the very same paper that my piece appeared, so also did a piece written by the chair of the House Education Committee, a Republican legislator from Monongalia County, explaining why the Common Core standards weren't going to make it here in West Virginia. One of the things she said, among the other things, and I won't go through all the arguments she made against them, but one of the things she mentioned was the fact that West Virginia is but one of 25 states which has requested to step back and rethink the Common Core standards. And the implication of her argument, of course, is that we are not out there all by ourselves, the state of West Virginia. We're merely following into line with 25 other states that are doing the same thing. Well, I think we've been together here at the Virtual Center long enough to know, and those of you who listen regularly to the Head On Radio Network know, that the fact that 25 states have done this isn't nearly a coincidence. It's not like 25 states independently and without contact state to state made the decision to take a step back on the Common Core. In fact, this is a national effort being orchestrated by well-funded conservative interests who want to defeat the Common Core. And all the rest of the arguments contained for doing in the articles for doing so are not reasons for stepping back on the Common Core. They are excuses for doing it. The major argument being that the Common Core represents a federalist takeover of our K through 12 public school system. Our state has also passed legislation supporting charter schools, even though that proposal is being challenged by those who recognize that the money to fund public schools would come directly out of the money used for public education in the state. Consequently, the creation of charter schools would not do anything to improve our public schools. It would merely drain refunds and make the challenge of our public schools even more difficult. Not only because of the money that they would lose, but also because charter schools, one of the key features of charter schools, of course, is that they have the ability to be selective in enrollment. They have the right to take the best students and reject the students they don't want. And of course, the ones they reject stay in the public schools, which creates discipline problems and everything else for our public schools. So in a sense, what's happening is charter schools are not really doing all that much to improve the education for our children. What they are doing is sealing the fate of public education. And I would suggest to you that that's the agenda. The improvement of education for all of our children is not the agenda. If it was, then charter schools would not be the answers, because charter schools only accepts the students they want. In other words, the charter school movement, and I'm not criticizing the particular ingredients of particular schools. Some of them feature science, some of them feature the arts, some of them feature, I think it's a great idea. I don't really have a problem with that. But the fact of the matter is, this is not an effort to benefit the educational quality for all of our children. Rather, it's an effort to cater to the interests of those children who are expected to succeed and to become leaders in our society. In other words, charter schools are a reflection of concern for the education of the few, not the many. And pretty much that's pretty much the thesis that my piece in this past Sunday's Charleston Gazette focused on. That in a sense, the actions that West Virginia has taken on Common Core are completely consistent with the theory, the abstract idea that Jefferson put forth in his General Diffusion of Knowledge Bill in Virginia in the 1770s. Namely, that the purpose of education was to make education mandatory for the first 3 years. Everybody, poor, rich, everybody, was required by law to attend school for 3 years. And Jefferson, as you'll recall, made the mention there that it's in that early stage, that first stage, that the ingredients of future order will be laid there. The idea is that this 3 years of mandatory education for all children is not for the benefit of the child. It is for the benefit of society. It is to give society an opportunity to teach behavior and virtue and values and morality and ethics and all the rest of it to the young, to teach them the difference between good and bad, so that when they leave school, if they belong to families where parents are unable to continue their education, if they have to pay for it, then in a sense this is the only education that the children of the poor will ever receive. As far as the state concerned, that's all we need to worry about, is whether in fact they're going to obey the law and do what they're told. I would suggest to you that's where education has to change. Common Core has the potential of doing that. Charter schools do not, at least not for the vast majority. For selected students with particular interests and particular talents, charter schools are wonderful. And I think, and again, I believe that we ought to do everything we can do to promote and strengthen and support charter schools, which offer particular educational opportunities for particular students, but not at the expense of the education of the masses, of the mass majority. And I think that in the 21st century, with the challenges not only that the nation is facing, but with the challenges that our young people are facing, the challenges that the middle classes are facing in our society and all the rest of it, it is absolutely vital that we do something substantive, that we step out of the box, and we do something substantially different in order to arm all of our people, not just some of our people, all of our people, for the challenges that they face in order that they have a chance to experience some level of success in this republic. That's the dream that the founders had. That's the dream that I have. I think that's what progressivism at its heart and soul is all about. And so therefore, I really believe it is incumbent upon all of us to stand up and call a spade a spade. The chairman, it's actually a woman, the chair of the House Education Committee who wrote this other article, the legislator from Monongalia County, and I'm stuck for a name. The only thing I can remember is her last name begins with a P, Posden or something like that. I don't mean to mess up her name. I just can't remember it offhand. But one of the things she said is that the reason for opposition to the Common Core, she believes, is because it represents a federal takeover of our education system. And thereby it threatens our West Virginia values. As somebody who has lived in West Virginia for 24 years, 23 and a half years now, and has watched West Virginia come in last or next to last in practically every single substantive measure of quality that educators can come up with, I would suggest to you that these are not the kind of values that I think we need to be preserving in our K through 12 education system. And therefore, that leads me to believe that there's something incendiary here about not wanting to educate our young people, the masses of our young people. And that raises some serious questions about issues about young people that would be overly educated or overqualified for the opportunities that will be made available to them. In other words, maybe the thinking is that with limited economic horizons here in Appalachia, the best thing to do is not create false hopes. Therefore, let's not overeducate our young. Let's not get them to believe that they can be more than the situation is going to give them an opportunity to become. Maybe the state's past and the influence of coal on our political leaders, which in effect denied the state the opportunity to diversify its economy. What we saw is an insidious relationship that has lasted for decades between extractive industries, coal, timber, gas, chemicals, those kinds of things, and government, which kept alternatives out of the state. In other words, the only thing that young people in this state could do that promised a rewarding living was to work in the mines or work in these other industries or leave the state. And because so many of our best and brightest young people were leaving the state, the legislature, in its wisdom, adopted some years ago a program called the Promise Scholarships, which, based on academic performance in high school, grants young people tuition-free college education, provided they agree to stay in West Virginia for a certain number of years after they graduate. And we know from the research that's been done in the years that the state has had the Promise Scholarship Program, that the vast majority of young people who are benefiting from the Promise Scholarship Program are people who come from families who would have gone to college anyway. In fact, the program was directly intended to benefit them. It was designed to subsidize their education at public taxpayers' expense in order to keep them in West Virginia. The solution to the brain drain in West Virginia is to concoct a program designed to keep the brain power here in the state rather than generate the kind of educational reform that will create more brain power. If you think of it that way, it seems to me it raises serious questions. Rather than enact the kind of reform that's going to improve the academic quality of what we do in our education system, and thereby enable more students to buy in and to be successful in that system, what we continue to do is manipulate the circumstances, tax laws, the budget, all of these things, in order to find ways to entice the few to carry out our wishes, rather than turn that few into a larger and larger few, which eventually could become the many. I think that's what we have to do. I think that's what we have to support. I think that's what the Common Core has the implication of doing. The Common Core in and of itself is not going to perform miracles. I don't think anybody, even the most optimistic of us can dream that. This is going to be an incredible challenge. But for the first time, there's an opportunity to coordinate the caliber of education that our young people receive with the quality of education received in other states throughout the Union. And we can measure where we're successful and where we need to put our efforts. Because the one thing that the Common Core mandates is that each year of public education will turn out students not only who know specific things, but more important, who can do specific things. Skill development, cognitive development, critical reading, the ability to think, the ability to create, the ability to interpret, the ability to analyze. All the things that our standards have long claimed we want our public schools to do, but outcomes that only a few of our schools, for a few of our students, have been able to do in the past. There is the question that maybe in some cases, and I don't know whether this is true in West Virginia, I hope not, that those in positions of authority believe that it would be too embarrassing to measure our academic standards against the standards of other states. Maybe the belief is the best thing we can do is claim we're great, but not have to not provide any data, so that nobody can prove us wrong. Maybe opposition to the Common Core is no deeper than fear of accountability. Who knows? But the fact of the matter is, here in West Virginia and other states as well, our legislature, in its wisdom, in but a 60-day session, which ends this Saturday, our legislative session ends this coming Saturday. I never thought I would say it, but thank God. I probably am one of the biggest fans of government that walks the face of the earth. But I've been absolutely amazed at what I've witnessed here in the last 53 or 54 days here in West Virginia. We have passed legislation which allows young people to carry guns without training. Without a permit, you can just go in and buy it. You can wear it on your hip. You can conceal it under your coat. You can put it in the dashboard of your car, in the glove compartment of your car. You can stash a loaded revolver under the front seat of your car. The legislative committee that endorsed and passed this bill did so in a committee chamber packed with police officers from around the state arguing against the wisdom of this legislation. But it was passed anyway. So you begin to wonder, are the members of the legislature even listening to the people who are coming to these sessions? Or are they listening to forces outside the state who have contributed substantial amounts of money to their political campaigns and enabled them to be in this position? Are they getting not only their instructions on how to vote, but even the legislation that they are being asked to vote on from outside the state? Which means that the entire political process, if that's true, would be a sham. It would be a charade. Because there's absolutely no communication going on between the electorate and their elected representatives. Because while many of the people in this state, I believe unwisely, I think many of them are beginning to appreciate that, voted for a change and allowed their opposition to the president and his administration and his policies to color their thinking to the point that they voted this whole new group of people into office. Most of them have never served in political office before. But that's okay, because they, where one would think it was risky to have on-the-job training in government, the fact of the matter is there's no necessary training necessary at all, because marching orders are coming on a regular basis from outside the state. Unfortunately, that seems to be true. It's not only true in West Virginia, and far be it from me to say that. But clearly, West Virginia was targeted as a red state long before the election was held that confirmed it. I think it's very significant, just as an example of another issue that we'll be getting into today on here on the Virtual Center. The letter of 47 Republican senators to the Islamic State of Iran. which is clearly intended to undercut the president's negotiation capabilities for a nuclear treaty with Iran. Is it an accident that the very next morning, after that letter was sent and made public, that the person who drafted it, Senator Tom Cotton of Tennessee, had a breakfast with representatives of the military industrial complex, Boeing, Grunning, airline industry, people who would benefit from the business that a more tense, more combative relationship between the United States and Iran would produce? Is that an accident? I don't know. But I would suggest to you there's an awful lot going on here. And one of the things I would like to do, and I probably have taken a little bit more time here, I've just gone beyond the half an hour of time, and I really didn't plan to take that much time, but it's okay. But since we haven't had programs for some time now, for 4 or 5, we've missed 4 or 5 programs in a row, then maybe I shouldn't be going off on tangents like this, but I think it is so important. Because what is happening, it seems to me, is so important. And all I can think of is thank heavens for the Virtual Center and the Head On Radio Network. And the opportunity for thinking, concerned people to air those concerns and share their thoughts with other people, and to try to figure out a strategy that might work. I think the demonstration or the protest that Bob was talking about here in Charleston, West Virginia, this coming Monday, over the issue of mountaintop removal, is an example of the kind of situation that we are seeing all around us. I mentioned Tom Cotton in Tennessee and the author of that letter. And of course, many of you, I'm sure, have been reading about what's going on in the state of Wisconsin as Governor Walker becomes more and more viable as a potential Republican candidate for the 2016 Republican nomination. He seems to be operating within the state as governor in ways designed to promote his candidacy by making himself look good to conservative fundraisers, to the Adelsons and the Kochs and the others who are writing the checks, paying the bills, and dictating the agenda. Governor Walker has signed right-to-work legislation in Wisconsin. I went to school in Wisconsin, and I am, a very big fan of Wisconsin's history. The whole idea of the Wisconsin idea, the role that the state of Wisconsin played in progressivism in the early 20th century, the activities and the behavior and the accomplishments of Robert La Follette as governor, as the progressive governor of Wisconsin in the early 20th century. And I see all of that going down the tube, so to speak. And it pains me deeply. I guess because I do have these Wisconsin connections. Fact of the matter is, the way it's going, we may all end up with Wisconsin connections if Scott Walker is indeed successful. But there's absolutely no question that the right-to-work legislation that passed the state of Wisconsin was not written in the state of Wisconsin. It was written by the group called ALEC, which is the legislative education group, conservative funded, that is drafting legislation and sending it around to the various states. So when the chair of the subcommittee that votes to repeal the Common Core standards in the state of West Virginia says that there really shouldn't be that much concern about this, because West Virginia is one of 25 states that's doing it. That scares me even more, because what it suggests is the agenda is being written and dictated from outside the state, where the voters of the state can't even be heard. So basically what we have in Charleston, it seems to me, are a group of people who have made the Faustian deal to do the bidding of those who paid for their election and to perpetrate the sham which is involved in the less than sincere listening of the concerns of constituents. While the people protest, while the committee rooms fill up, the legislation continues to pass piece after piece after piece. It seems to me that this may be one of the most interesting periods in the history of the Republic. And again, I'm struck by the fact that there is no guarantee that the Republic will survive. No republic in the history of the world prior to this one ever did survive. And while the founders were extremely confident that this one would make it, because they really believed that they had made the kind of changes that would guarantee its success, the fact of the matter is there really aren't any guarantees. When Benjamin Franklin was asked what members of the Constitutional Convention gave us, and Benjamin Franklin replied in 1787, "A republic, if you can keep it." We are beginning to see the realities of that challenge. I hope that we are up to it. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. If you would like to chime in on these issues, or on my spin on these issues, this is interpretive, this is not educational, this is political. I admit that. Therefore, those of you who would challenge or disagree or take issue with what I've said, I would love to hear from you, and I mean that. I'm throwing out my concerns. This is not in concrete. I have not closed my mind forever and ever and ever. I hope I'm wrong in a lot of these areas. But again, I hope that some of the things that I said and was able to put together might strike a chord and might cause you to maybe pick up the phone, give us a call, and we can talk about some of these issues. Again, the phone number, area code 304-663-4676. We have reached 40 minutes after the hour. So we have gone 2/3 of the way through our first hour here at the Virtual Center on this Wednesday, the 11th of March. I would like to briefly revisit the issues that were on the table the last time that we got together here at the Virtual Center, which was nigh on to 2 weeks ago. I believe it was 2 weeks ago today, to be honest. And you'll remember that what I had done on that day was to provide an overview of the recently promoted issues surrounding the challenge to the Republic, reflected in the polarization that exists in Washington. The inability of Congress to function. The dysfunction, if you will, between conservatives and liberals, between Democrats and Republicans. The data that shows clearly that the disconnect between Republicans and Democrats is not an illusion. It is not the product of a few firebrands on either side of the aisle. The data suggests that Democrats are voting together more often than they ever did before left of center. And Republicans are doing the same thing right of center. In other words, there are fewer and fewer examples of Democrats or Republicans crossing the line and voting on the other side. The voting data proves this. It proves that political partisanship and polarization in Washington is real. But what we were talking about the last time we were together was an incredibly significant piece that was delivered to the University of Pennsylvania Law School in February by Larry Kramer, who is now the president of the Hewlett Foundation, but for a number of years was dean of Stanford Law School. And when Larry Kramer left Stanford to accept the position of leadership at the Hewlett Foundation, he brought his academic baggage with him, if that's an appropriate way to put it. In other words, Kramer has long been a constitutional scholar in the area of constitutional law. His research and his concerns, his interests, have focused more and more on the polarization issues which seem to engulf the Republic, that seem to create discord and dysfunction in the halls of Congress. And he has spent a lot of time and a lot of energy deducing causes for this polarization and speculating on ways to do something about it. And when he left Stanford to accept the position at the Hewlett Foundation, he brought these issues and these concerns with him. And so consequently, the Hewlett Foundation, a foundation which commands in excess of $8 billion, has adopted what it calls its Madison Initiative, which is a strategy to look for ways to reverse the political trends which Larry Kramer believes threaten the future of this republic. And while we spent our last program together 2 weeks ago looking at a general overview of this issue, I had promised that in future programs we would come back to this issue and look at the ingredients of the matter in more detail. We would begin to look at the issues encompassed by, considered by Larry Kramer's overview. Causes of polarization. What kinds of political action would be necessary to begin to make constructive change to the issues in our political system which seem to be causing polarization. Recognition that polarization is not really the problem. Polarization is a reflection of a problem. And according to Larry Kramer, the problem is that the Republic, through polarization and partisanship, has begun to function. But what I really mean, has stopped functioning, and thereby threatens the very existence of the Republic. Because the founders created a republic that required the successful operation of the two-party system in American politics. The Constitution created by the founders required a political system in which people were inclined to cross the aisle and find solutions to problems. And polarization and the issues which create polarization have rendered that process inoperable. And Mr. Kramer believes thereby threatened the future existence of this republic. And we talked about, very briefly, some of the ways that Kramer thinks the Hewlett Foundation can begin to address this problem. Admittedly, Kramer does so with apologies, because the thinking has not gone that far yet. In other words, the Hewlett Foundation is in search of ideas, of ways to meet the problem and solve it. And the Hewlett Foundation clearly has committed substantial resources to identifying, defining, and addressing some of these major problems. And what I had promised in our last program is that after that overview, which I've just kind of reviewed, we would go back and we would begin to look at the pieces of this puzzle in order to try to get a more definitive understanding of the system that the framers created, how it was intended to work, what it required in order to work, what the greatest threats to its ability to work might be, and potential strategies to find solutions to some of these problems when indeed the system is not working as it was designed to work. Obviously, this is the essence of what the Virtual Center is about. This is indeed, it seems to me, what the essence of civic education in America must be about. We have got to begin to educate our people, not just the leaders, not just a few, all of our people, on the responsibilities of citizenship. What this system requires of them in order to be successful, in order to not fail, in order to provide the kinds of opportunities that create the potential for exceptionalism that are inherent in this republic. Again, American exceptionalism is not something that has already happened. American exceptionalism remains something that might be achieved if we have the will and the wisdom to achieve it. I believe that's what the function, the mission of the Virtual Center and our time together must be about. So I think that this particular issue is one which warrants a number of days and a significant amount of time and attention here at the Virtual Center. And I am committed to doing that. I want to share it with you. I look forward to your willingness to participate with me as we go into these issues. I hope that you will feel comfortable picking up the phone or writing an email or dropping comments to me or to Bob Kincaid in the chat line at the Head On Center or somewhere so that we can work together on some of these issues. But as we approach the top of our first hour today, it's 50 minutes after the hour. We've got about 10 minutes left before we take a short break. The world does not stop while we deal in political and philosophical abstractions. It seems to me what all of this is about, we're trying to better understand the Republic, how it was designed to function, and what it needs in order to function. All of it is credible principally because it helps us understand and helps to explain and helps to define the day-to-day issues that all of us must take on as citizens in this republic. The purpose of dealing in theory and philosophical abstraction, it seems to me, is that these exercises go a long way in helping us get a better grasp of and understanding of some of the real world issues that confront all of us. Our focus has principally, at the Virtual Center, has principally revolved around the first principles, the key documents, most especially the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. And I think what we've done here at the Virtual Center, which others are reluctant to do, haven't done, and I think Larry Kramer is remiss in this area as well, as to give due consideration to the Confederation period, the decade that fell between the Declaration of Independence in 1776 and the convening of the Philadelphia Constitutional Convention in May of 1787. There's 10 years of history there. And while there are ideological and philosophical benefits for some to deny the existence of that history and to suggest thereby that the approval of the Declaration of Independence led logically to the next step, which was the establishment of the Constitution of the United States in order to make the principles of the Declaration feasible and viable. The reality is that the history of the period does not support that. The history of the period suggests that the Articles of Confederation was the form of government or the structure of government that was deemed to be most consistent with the philosophy of the Declaration of Independence. And the fact is that many of the problems which surfaced in America in the 1780s demonstrated to leadership in the founders, to the Madisons and the Hamiltons and the Washingtons and the Tench Coxes and the John Adamses and all the rest of them, that major structural changes in the structure of government were going to happen if the republic created in 1776 was to survive. And the Constitution of the United States was a response to those political realities It was not a response to the philosophy of the Declaration of Independence. And I think we need to deal with that, whether it be comfortable or uncomfortable. It is valid. You cannot just overlook or ignore a full decade of a nation's history, because if you skip it, it makes things connect better and therefore be more consistent with your ideological druthers or priorities. I believe Larry Kramer is guilty of this. I think Larry Kramer's thesis is that the two factors around which this republic, this nation came into being was republicanism, the nature of Republican government created in 1776, and the constitutional system fashioned in 1787. But the implication that the two are consistent is invalid. What had to happen in order to make that consistency real is that literally the definition of republicanism itself had to be changed. Hamilton and Madison in the Federalist Papers had to construct a view of republicanism which would keep the name but eliminate the issues that contradicted the political realities of the late 1780s, the political realities addressed by the Constitutional Convention. And this is the term that I used, or the phrase, the way I explained it the last time we were together, and the more I thought about it, I think it is the way to make sense out of this. The fact of the matter is, in 1787, with ratification of the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution was not the means to the accomplishment of Republican ends outlined in the Declaration of Independence. From that scenario, if you look at it that way, from the perspective of ends and means, republicanism was the end. The Constitution was the means to reach that end. That's the way that Larry Kramer, and that's the way that conservative ideologues choose to look at the issue. The fact of the matter is, in 1787, given the political problems of the Confederation period as defined by Madison and Hamilton and the rest of them, we haven't gone into those problems and whether in fact they were serious enough problems to jeopardize the Republic or not. There are those, John Kaminsky in Madison, Wisconsin being one, there are those who believe that with the right kind of changes, the Articles of Confederation could have worked, could have indeed been revised in conjunction with the definition of republicanism which the founders had in 1776. But that was not the goal. By 1787, that objective was gone. And what was defining reality instead was the Constitution of the United States as it responded to the political realities of the late 80s. So at the time of ratification, the Constitution is not the means to an end. The Constitution is the end. And the redefinition of Republican government to fit that end becomes the means. So from the conservative perspective, The end, the goal, is republicanism. The means is the Constitution. But from the perspective that history teaches us, the Constitution of 1787 becomes the end. And the definition of republicanism is adjusted to fit that, to meet that. I think that's very significant. I think we will have to continually address it and continually take it seriously. But we have reached the top of the hour. And as I mentioned, the world goes on while we deal in abstractions to a large degree. But the fact of the matter is, if dealing in abstractions is going to be justified in any way, it's got to be because these abstractions and conversations help us better understand the real world problems that the nation continues to face. On Monday, I believe, 47 Republican members of the United States Senate drafted a letter to Iran, which was clearly intended to undercut the Obama administration's efforts to negotiate a nuclear settlement, a nuclear treaty with Iran in order to keep Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. Even though the letter was phrased in such a way that it was ostensibly a lesson in how the American Constitution works for the Iranian government, the fact of the matter is what it successfully seemed to be designed to do was to sabotage those negotiations and thereby retain the hostile military stance between Iran and the United States, which has been the reality for far too long. It seems to me that this issue has serious political and constitutional ramifications. It has serious ramifications about the president's ability and role and responsibility to conduct foreign policy. It has serious responsibilities in terms of the president's ability to represent the nation and to speak on behalf of all of the citizens of this nation. It has serious implications in the area of nullification, where a portion of people can manipulate the system in such a way that they can decide to not allow law or legislation to apply directly to them. They can basically make the decision independently to nullify statute law in this country. And then there's the issue of treason itself. Is the activity of a group of senators to undercut the negotiation capabilities in foreign policy of the President of the United States treasonable? I think we can go back to the issues we've been dealing with here in order to generate some prospective answers to these kinds of questions. That's what I'm hoping we'll be able to do today in our second hour. It's 4 minutes after the hour, 4 minutes after 2 in the East, Eastern Daylight Time. Eastern Standard Time now. We just went into Daylight Time, didn't we? I'm totally confused. We were in Eastern Standard Time. Now it's Eastern Daylight Time. Anyway, it's 4 minutes after 2 in the East. How's that? I'm Bill O'Brien. This is the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We're going to pause for a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll complete our second hour in this Wednesday edition of the Virtual Center. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Thank you, Bob Kincaid. I had to put my microphone on, and
no worries.
Neglected to do it. And I'm glad you saw that I was ready, because I couldn't figure out how to send you the email to tell you I was ready. But anyway, whatever. It's a pleasure to be back and to be back in our second hour today. But more important, it's a pleasure to be back here at the Virtual Center after too long a time without our regular ongoing conversation. I do invite you to participate actively in our program. That's really what a conversation requires, it seems to me. And we would love to hear from you. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. And of course, 4676 translates into HORN, horn. My email address, if you'd like to communicate directly with me, waobrien906 at gmail.com. waobrien, IEN 906 at gmail.com. As I tried to indicate right at the top of the last hour as a lead into this one, it seems to me that the value of dealing in abstraction, the value of theory, is principally in its application. If theory can be applied positively and help us better understand some of the issues, real issues, that we find ourselves confronted with, then engaging in theoretical exercise, it seems to me, is quite valuable. That does not deny that the exercise in philosophy and theory in and of itself is valuable. That's another issue for another day. But the fact of the matter is, for those people who constantly look at for evidence of benefit and value, it seems to me the evidence of the value of abstraction and theory lies in its application. If we can use the theory to better understand reality, then it seems to me we're onto something. And of course, we've been dealing in the nature of the Republic and the ingredients of civic responsibility, the Larry Kramer presentation to the University of Pennsylvania Law School, which is available on the law school's website, by the way. If you go to the University of Pennsylvania Law School, Larry Kramer's presentation is available on that website, as it is on Michael Smerconish's website. If you go to Mike Smerconish, on Google, you will find a copy of Larry Kramer's presentation to the Pennsylvania Law School as well. It's an important presentation. It says an awful lot. It deals with an awful lot. And to be very honest with you, and this may be a prejudice on my part, but I think the issue of the future of the Republic and the meaning of the Republic is an issue well worth our time and attention. But as I mentioned, the real world goes on. And in the real world, among the other things that we've been dealing with, is the reality of continued dysfunction in Washington, as reflected in this week's letter signed by 47 members, Republican members of the United States Senate, to Iran, in a clearly incendiary effort to undercut the Obama administration's ability to reach a nuclear deal with Iran on the development of nuclear weapons by Iran. The fact of the matter is, if you go back to Larry Kramer's presentation about the founders and about the operative necessities of this republic in order to function as it was designed to function, then the ability to reach negotiation, not only with foreign powers, but with those within our own nation with whom we disagree, is the critical ingredient. In other words, what this letter does, by seeking to undercut the president's ability to make and undertake and conduct foreign policy on behalf of the citizens of the United States, is to demonstrate clearly what the problem is. The problem that Larry Kramer was talking about, namely the degree of partisanship and polarization which so engulfs our political system that it has created two opposite forces in the conservative Republican Party versus the liberal Democratic Party, to the extent that the moderates in both parties have disappeared, have largely disappeared. And what you have is two antagonistic bodies which vote in lockstep against each other, and thereby render the ability of government to govern impossible. And it seems to me the negotiation of foreign policy with other powers, especially hostile powers, potentially hostile powers, seems to me to be a real-world issue as to what this whole thing is about. So what I thought I would do was spend a little bit of time with just one portion of Larry Kramer's piece. The piece which is really the basis of his entire thesis. And then look at it within the context of this particular foreign policy issue. First, the very title of Larry Kramer's piece to the University of Pennsylvania Law School. The title of his presentation is to adjust these clashing interests, negotiation and compromise as core constitutional values. The subtitle of his presentation, then, Negotiation and Compromise as Core Constitutional Values, clearly contradicts the realities of polarization. The fact that 47 opposition members in the United States Senate would co-sign a letter to a potentially hostile foreign power in an effort to undercut the ability of the President of the United States to conduct foreign policy, it seems to me is an example of the dysfunction, which is really the essence of what I believe our concerns need to be about. So what I thought I would do in the time left is to look at Larry Kramer's presentation about the issue of negotiation and compromise, where he sees it, how it's supposed to work, and then see if in fact it is applicable to the situation at hand. About a third of the way into Larry Kramer's presentation, the first third deals with the nation in and around the Declaration of Independence, in and around 1776, the Revolution for Independence, and the republic that it produced. I think there are some important issues there to address, and we will address them in a future program. But as Larry Kramer says, then independence, the revolution, and Republican government that it produced is the first issue which forms the basis for the creation of the American identity. We have a nation of immigrants. We have a nation of people whose principal loyalty is not to the nation, but to their own states and their own communities, their own neighborhoods. And somehow to successfully unify these 13 colonies into a nation and find a way to govern that nation successfully requires that you create some sort of an American identity, that you find ways to cause people to more and more see themselves as members of a common political entity, the United States of America, and less citizens of the cities of Boston and Philadelphia and Baltimore and Lynchburg and all the rest of them. Or citizens of Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Virginia, South Carolina, etc. And Larry Kramer believes this is where the Constitution of the United States comes in, because the Constitution of the United States is the political system which creates that unity. And it becomes the functional basis around which a common American identity, in conjunction with the Republic, is created. And then Larry Kramer asks the following questions, and this is the way he gets into his thesis. But if acceptance of and commitment to our Republican Constitution defines what it means to be an American, we need to ask, what does the Constitution stand for? Or more accurately, what does it require of us? What are our responsibilities as citizens of this republic under the Constitution of the United States? Each of you, Larry Kramer says, will have answers to this question. Most of them, I suspect, pointing toward values like equality, free speech, due process, privacy, property rights, and so forth. All of which are unquestionably important. Though it's interesting to note how the most typical answers come from the later added Bill of Rights and not the original Constitution. And of course, we've talked about that. Many of the things that our citizens consider to be the most important elements of the Constitution tend to be associated more with the Bill of Rights than they are with the Constitution itself. Because the Bill of Rights addresses rights. That's what we get out of living here. The Constitution of the United States, however, contains our responsibilities. We tend not to focus on those. But that's where Larry Kramer's focus is for this entire presentation. Because at its heart, Kramer says, our Constitution is about realizing and implementing democratic self-government. And the question we really need to ask is, what does the Constitution require of us to make that work? What does the Constitution require of us to make democratic self-government work? The answer, he says, interestingly enough, is not something typically highlighted or even mentioned in most discussions of our political system, and he's right there. Yet it is essential. A set of core values, perhaps the core values, needed to make republicanism work. I mean, as the subtitle of this talk indicates, a willingness to deliberate, to negotiate, and ultimately to compromise with others who disagree. That is the key to this constitutional system working, according to Larry Kramer. I have to tell you that it is also mine. if you think back over the months and years now, because today is the 11th. I just thought today is March 11th. This is the third anniversary of when we began our programs here at the Virtual Center today. I had forgotten. I knew it was early March and I forgot about it. It's today. So today, March 11th, 2015, we begin our third year here at the Virtual Center. Anyway, Larry Kramer's thesis then is that what is necessary of us in order to make this Republican work is a willingness to deliberate, to negotiate, and ultimately to compromise with those who disagree with us. This, I want to suggest, and this is Kramer, this, I want to suggest, is a fundamental responsibility and obligation of both citizens and their representatives in government. Let me repeat that. This is a fundamental obligation and responsibility of both citizens and their representatives in government, a necessary condition for Republican rule, and one of the central principles on which our constitutional system rests. That claim may come as a surprise or sound strange, because while deliberation has always attracted attention, hardly anyone ever highlights or draws specific attention to negotiation and compromise as constitutional values at all, much less as core values. The willingness to deliberate, to negotiate, and to find compromise. It is not only a responsibility of citizens, it is a responsibility of those who represent citizens, the elected representatives. Let me stop here and make a point. I think you already know what that point is. If, and what we'll be going into the way that Larry Kramer defends this or supports this thesis, but for purposes right here, let's assume that Larry Kramer is 100% right, that we totally agree with him. If you accept what Larry Kramer says, that the need to deliberate, compromise, negotiate, and compromise is the core value, it's what makes Republican government in this nation work. And it's a requirement not only of citizens, but also of their elected representatives. If you accept that as a fact, then by definition, polarization in our two-party system is detrimental to the republic itself. And those who cause it, those who create it, are tampering with treason, because they are literally weakening the very foundations on which this nation must function. So by definition, all the history that all of us remember about factions, President Washington's farewell address warning us about the dangers of parties, the partisanship that emerged in the 1790s in the split between the Hamiltonian Federalists and the Jeffersonian Republicans, and the two-party system which emerged out of that partisanship. A two-party system that more than any place else can be placed at the seat of James Madison, the person who wrote the Constitution of the United States, is instrumental in the 1790s in the creation of the design of a two-party system. Madison believes that partisanship, factionalism, the division of society into two hostile groups, unwilling to talk, unwilling to deliberate, unwilling to negotiate, unwilling to compromise, will break this system. So what Madison comes up with, and of course he gets a lot of this from David Hume. If you read David Hume's philosophy, David Hume talks a lot about this in his essays on civil government. What you must have is a political system which encompasses or embraces the two opposition sides. And by creating a system which functions on majority will on the majority vote, whoever wins the majority gets control of the reins of government, then what you do is force the spokesman for these two alien alternative positions to deliberate, compromise, and negotiate. You force the extremes towards the center, because the only way to get a majority vote is to aim your campaign towards the center by creating a message that is moderate. You attract moderate conservatives and moderate liberals, moderate people from the central left of center, and people from the right of center. And that's where your majority is. The minute you move too far to either the left extreme or the right extreme, you eliminate your possibility to win a majority. In conjunction with the Republican government created in the Constitution of the United States, the two-party system is vital to the functioning of that system. And it is a two-party system which is based on deliberation, negotiation, and compromise. Larry Kramer is exactly right. It's the Larry King. Larry King may be right too, but I don't think he knows a whole lot about this. Larry Kramer is exactly right. In a sense, then, these issues become the core values of the American Republic, of the American constitutional system. And what we are witnessing now are leaders on both sides who do not appreciate or do not understand the realities of what makes this republic function. And this letter to Iran is a classic example of it. John Boehner's invitation to Benjamin Netanyahu to come over here and address the Congress of the United States and not even inform the President of the United States that he was doing it is an example of behavior that constitutes suicide for this republic. It doesn't do anything to promote solutions. It just creates the kind of environment which makes it more and more impossible to govern. It is a direct contradiction to the realities and the necessities of this republic. What I would like to emphasize is Kramer's assertion that this is not only the responsibility of citizens in this republic, it is also the responsibility of elected representatives. In other words, as elected representatives of the people in this republic, it is the responsibility of government to lead this effort to deliberate, negotiate, and compromise. And if they don't, in fact, if they do exactly the opposite, which is whip up the people into hostile, antagonistic camps, if they continue to paint moderates as weak-kneed, effeminate, self-interested do-gooders who stand for nothing, who have no principle, if they lead people into believing that those who would seek compromise and those who would seek deliberation are weak and unprincipled and un-American, then they are doing direct damage to the very foundation of this republic. We have got to understand this, it seems to me. How does Larry King, how does Larry Kramer explain then the relationship between citizens and their elected representatives? How does that work? More important, how does it square with the system as it was created, with Madison? Madison says that the heart of republicanism and of Republican government is popular control. Madison says, quote, power is in the people over the government, not in government over the people. Madison goes on to say, public opinion is the real sovereign in every free government. Popular control means majority control. Consequently, that means that our Constitution functions around the issue of majorities. We know that. That's the way our elections work. The majority wins. So Madison is a supporter of public opinion, a supporter of Republican government, a supporter of popular government. Then by definition, he is a supporter of majority rule. But he is an opponent of factions. What's the difference between majority rule and faction? This, to me, seems to be the critical, essential issue. How can you be opposed to factions and at the same time supportive of majority rule? Madison's answer to this is in Federalist number 10. This is deep down the essence of majority rule in this republic. Namely, that majorities can often be unjust and unreasonable as well as just and unreasonable. The mere fact that you are a majority to Madison does not automatically give you, or should not automatically give you, power. Rather, it is essential that that majority be an informed majority. It be a reasonable majority. It is a majority opinion based on a serious consideration as to what the best interests of the nation as a whole are. It is, in effect, an example of what Rousseau called the general will. That ultimately there had to be dialogue, there had to be deliberation, there had to be debate, there had to be negotiation, there had to be compromise. And once all of that happened, it's the majority out of that process that must rule in this republic. Consequently, the only way that you can achieve a reasonable majority is to do everything you can to promote deliberation, negotiation, and compromise. The only way that majority rule can work in this republic is if it is a majority rule that is reasonable, that has gone through the process, that has taken time to deliberate, to weigh alternatives, to see implications, to meet the objections of those who disagree. And out of this process comes the majority. And it's that majority that Madison believes must govern. The only way that that can happen is if the representatives set the tone, if the representatives are the model, if the representatives lead the process. Consequently, those who would divide, those who would prevent deliberation, those who would attack moderation, those who would challenge discussion and challenge negotiation, those who would undercut the president's ability to negotiate a treaty with a potentially hostile foreign power and seek to build allies in support of their position in order to build a majority based on that opinion, that is not democracy in this republic. That is the absolute contradiction of democracy in this republic. That will destroy this republic. In his first inaugural address, in what the textbooks refer to as the Revolution of 1800, Thomas Jefferson said that, quote, Americans must bear in mind the sacred principle that though the will of the majority is in all cases to prevail, that will, to be rightful, must be reasonable. The majority without the deliberation, negotiation, and compromise is a bogus majority. It is not a majority that has expended any effort to even come close to something called the general will or the public interest. It is a majority fashioned around private interest. It is factionalism. It is suicidal to this republic. And it is the basis for laying out a strategy as to what we have to do in order to combat this. We have got to take on the Fox Newses. You do not save this republic by going down the same road as that taken by those who would destroy this republic. We mentioned a couple of weeks ago here at the Virtual Center in talking about ISIS that there was clearly a danger that ISIS, in its brutality and inhumanity, was doing everything it could in order to entice us to play the game by rules that it set, by its rules. If we respond, if we are provoked enough to respond, we lose. Because they are defining the rules by which we play. Except this is not play. This is the same principle we're dealing with here. those who would go out and seek to indoctrinate and brainwash citizens into supporting their point of view, and the effort of these people who are skilled orators to rationalize that view, that personal self-interested view, by claiming it to be the public interest. That is not the way this republic was designed to function. The two-party system, as Madison created it, is the system best adapted to meeting the requirements of citizenship responsibilities in this republic. Factionalism will destroy it. Consequently, Madison's Federalist Number 10 about enlarging the sphere and taking in a variety of different factions, the key to Madison is not to destroy factions, because you can't. They're natural. They exist all the time. What Madison is talking about is you've got to make sure that there are so many factions that there can never be a majority. Because if the majority faction ever exists, it will destroy this nation. And I believe with technology, and Larry Kramer doesn't even talk about this here so much in his article, but I believe technology makes the majority faction possible in ways that it was never dreamed possible before. I think that whatever solution we reach to save this republic has to be one that takes into consideration the so-called social media, the Twitters and the texts and the Instagrams and all the rest of it. We have got to get more people to understand the basic essence of how this republic is designed to function. Because there are too many people out there with a vested interest in taking us in an alternative direction. And the reality is that alternative direction will destroy this republic. And in that I think Larry Kramer is exactly right. And in that I think the Hewlett Foundation is putting their resources and their wisdom pointing it in the right direction. But I really believe that this is incredible. The majority needs to rule, but the majority must be reasonable. And the only way to define a majority that is reasonable is to define a majority that has seriously gone through the process of deliberation, negotiation, and compromise. The willingness to really hear the other side. A willingness to try to reach compromise on what the best interests for the nation as a whole are all about. What is the public interest? What is Rousseau's general will? If each individual person could be individually contacted and asked, what would you prefer in this particular situation, given this, given that, given the dangers, given the options, given the possibilities, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, if every citizen could make an informed, reasonable, deliberate decision on what is best for the nation as a whole in a particular issue, if we could add all of that up, we would be able to define the general will. Rousseau believed that if you really did that and did it seriously, everybody's answer would be the same. In other words, his idea is that reason, a serious effort at reason, would take all of us to the same place. Rousseau believed that government's job is to get to that place and pass the kind of statute legislation that would reflect the realities of that place. In other words, laws passed by the legislative branch of government ought to reflect, represent the public interest. And the only way to define the public interest is through a process of deliberation, negotiation, and compromise. And the only way to enable that process to happen is to give it time. And the only way to make sure that the process happens is to rely on the leadership, on the elected representatives to set the tone and to reflect the interests of the people as their reasonable alternatives begin to take form. Consequently, it is necessary for the representatives to maintain contact back and forth with their constituents. Because if elected representatives are deliberating, negotiating, and compromising at the government level, at the congressional level, that it is important that they bring back to their constituents what the public interest seems to be as it is taking shape in Washington, and giving the citizens the opportunity to respond to that. And then taking that response back to Washington, putting it on the table, and entering that response into the conversation as the deliberation and the willingness to negotiate and compromise goes on. And the sum total of that process, allowed to run to its completion, will produce the public interest. It will produce a popular government that can govern by majority rule, because the majority will be informed, the majority will be reasonable. I think at this point it would be wise for us to stop and take a moment to reflect on this. Is this naivete? Is this idealism gone mad? Is this pie in the sky optimism? Can this be real? Is Madison out of his mind? I thought he was a politician. Can this possibly work in the real world, or is this a dream? If you're a cynic, you probably conclude that it is a dream, an unreachable dream. But if you are an optimist, if you are a dreamer, if you believe in man, if you have a modicum of faith in the nature of man, if you believe that part of why man was put on this earth is to find ways to make a process like this work, then I would suggest to you, you are a progressive. And you ought to be proud of it. And you ought to be willing to sing it from the rooftops. Shout it from the rooftops, I guess is the appropriate phrase. Yes, it's idealistic. Yes, it's optimistic. But given the nature of the republic that we created, I would suggest it's the only game in town. The alternative is what's going to happen as a result of the dysfunction and the polarization and partisanship that exists currently, not only in government, in those who elected to serve us in government, but also among the citizenry themselves. We have reached the point where citizens are bombing abortion centers. Citizens are doing horrible things to other citizens based on their gender, on their race, on their nationality. We have just had over the weekend an example at the University of Oklahoma of seemingly educated people espousing a kind of racism that most of us believed was dead in this country. Maybe not really believed, but hoped. It's not. Martin Luther King's walk across the Selma Bridge, I would suggest, is the beginning, not the end of something that needs to continue to happen. In terms of abuse of children, of women, of spouses, hostility towards Muslims, towards people who dress and look differently than we are, who worship God differently than we do. It seems to me that what we are talking about here is not an idealistic pie-in-the-sky system that can't work given the realities of the world we live in. Rather, what we are seeing is a political system designed by brilliant people 2 centuries ago that, if taken seriously, may provide us the only solution to the real world we live in. In other words, should the dreams and the optimism be shelved because the reality of the world will not allow it to happen? Or should the optimism and the dreams be taken off the shelf and worked upon as the only ways to change the realities in the world we live? I don't know about you, but I'm much more comfortable with the latter than I am the former. That's why I believe this is so incredibly important. I have not changed my intent here at the Virtual Center that we need to go back and we need to look much more carefully at this particular case, at the situation which produced the Declaration, the situation that's the political situations and historical situations which produced the Constitution, the changes in the definition of republicanism that made it all possible, and the role of citizen education in that republic. But the fact of the matter is, it seems to me what we have our finger on now, and I'm excited about it. I've been at this stuff for more than 50 years. And for the first time in all of that period, I feel like I'm at the point where I'm beginning to be able to put my finger exactly on what this is all about. And I'm excited about it. And I'm just hopeful that I can do my part to spread that excitement and give other people the same kind of excitement about the potential. I think this is absolutely fantastic stuff. But it suggests that many of the realities of the political world we live in need to change and change fast. And we're seeing it played out in state legislatures across the country. We're seeing it played out in Congress. We're seeing it played out in the political contributions and the Supreme Court decisions. The Supreme Court is sitting on a case right now with the Affordable Care Act. It has it in its power, if the Supreme Court chooses to go literally by the wording of the legislation in the Affordable Care Act, the decision must be to gut that entire legislation and take 8 million people off the rolls in terms of health care in this country after they've had it. Do you think that the American people are going to sit back and allow that to happen? I think we are confronting some absolutely incredible obstacles. I think today we have begun to find a way towards a potential solution. We're at 59 minutes after the hour. We need to to end our time together today, let me remind you that we will not be doing a live program on Monday. We will be back on Tuesday at the half hour. It'll be the 90-minute program beginning at 1:30 in the East on Tuesday. This is Bill O'Brien for the Virtual Center. Thank you so much for listening. Be safe. Have a wonderful weekend. And thank you.